Hi, I'm Susan Bauer, co-author of The Well-Trained Mind.
And I'm Susanna, Jarrett, editor at the Well-Trained Mind Press. And we're talking about education for all parents and for all children in all sorts of settings. And on this episode, we have a very special guest, Susan's son, Chris Bauer.
Yay.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Hello. It's me, all children.
You should note that Chris, I can't call him Chris. He's Christopher.
You can call me Chris. That's fine.
Well, we've always called him Christopher. And actually, Christopher, I don't know if you remember this, but a couple of years ago, you were like, don't call me Chris. It's weird. Other people could call me Chris, but you can't do it. So Susanna will call him Chris. I will call him Christopher. That's just how it's going to be.
That's 100%. When I went to college, I rebranded myself. I'm Chris now. But it is that thing of even when you do that and then you go home and your family that's called you Christopher for 17 years starts saying Chris. It's like, ugh, stop.
Never mind. Rebrand over.
Yeah. Something is strange here. Yes.
That makes sense. Well, Chris, we are so glad that you're here to give us the inside scoop on what it was like to be homeschooled by Susan Bauer herself.
Yes.
And thank you for being willing to come on.
Absolutely. I'll give you a few tidbits, the preview from my forthcoming memoir.
Perfect.
Wait, but you're going to hold that till I'm dead, right? Because,
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Absolutely.
Well, let's start with a kind of an overview question of if you could. So for context, I think most of our listeners are familiar with Susan Bauer. You homeschooled your own children. Chris you are the oldest, right?
Mm-hmm.
He was my experiment, my test child.
Right. And you were homeschooled, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were homeschooled all the way through from kindergarten until you graduate high school.
Correct. Yes.
So you had the full-on homeschool experience. We're going to be talking about that today.
And Christopher, I don't even think you did online classes. I know the younger ones did. I know you did some correspondence, but did you do online classes?
I think that was because it was, oh gosh.
That was the very beginning of it.
Yeah, the mid 2000s where I think maybe online classes weren't quite as ubiquitous as they are now. And so it was literally that you would do a test or an assignment and then mail it into them.
Yes. No, it definitely was not a quality online learning experience.
No. And they were okay. There were some I really enjoyed, although there was one that was it was an art class. And so
I remember this.
It was a book where it was like just in words. It was like, here's how you draw. And so I drew stuff and sent it to them. And then they were like, no, D. And I was like, all right.
Oh, no.
It doesn't seem like
really
the
hard.
optimal way to develop this skill.
No, that was not. I remember that. That was not a good experience.
Homeschooling has come a long way. The options available.
That is very true.
Chris, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here. If you could describe your homeschool experience in 3 words, what would they be? And then throughout our time with you, we can kind of dive in deeper into what that means.
Wait. Aren't we going to ask him to talk a little bit about who he is?
Oh, sure.
People need to know that.
Yes. Who am I? Well, so just to do a little rundown of everything since the kindergarten through high school. So yes, kindergarten through high school. And then I graduated and I took a gap year in between high school and going to college, which I highly recommend to anybody who's interested in it, because that was a super formative experience. And in fact, I took a year off, and for 6 months I spent working with my grandmother on her memoir. And she just passed last year. But that was a really valuable experience. And then I spent 6 months. Let's see. So I went to South Africa and I worked at an animal rehabilitation clinic for a month and got bitten by monkeys. And the other volunteers taught me if a monkey bites you, you have to bite it back. So it was shocking that I did not get Ebola. And then I went to Egypt for 10 days to Cairo to visit a family friend. And actually, when I left South Africa to go to Cairo, I had a fungal infection in my throat, which was exciting. But then it just died naturally in Egypt. So that was exciting. And then I went to India for 2 months and did some just traveling and some teaching, actually, math and English and stuff in Rajasthan, which is the desert sort of out on the border of Pakistan. And then I went to China for 6 weeks to a martial arts academy, which was a whole thing. And then I went to Australia and volunteered at a zoo for a month. And actually, while I was in India, I found out that I got into UVA, which Charlottesville is about 2.5 hours away.
2 hours from us.
About 2 hours away from the farm?
Yep.
So I went to UVA with really no idea what I wanted to study. And that's part of the reason I chose it was because it's such a big school that I knew whatever I decided I wanted to do, there would probably be an option.
You knew it was going to be liberal arts-ish, probably.
Well, actually, originally I was thinking about religious studies.
That's still liberal arts.
Fair enough. But so one of the first things I took was I signed up for an intro to philosophy class. And they gave me I'm not kidding, Webster's Dictionary sized book of tiny print about philosophy. And the first lecture, the professor said, I'm not going to assign you readings, but I expect you to have read this entire book by the end of the semester. This was my first semester. And I was like, no. So I dropped that class immediately and I looked for what else was available. And there was a acting 1 class. And I absolutely fell in love with that. And I ended up getting a BA in theater. So there you go. And then after that, I briefly worked for a traveling children's theater in upstate New York. And then I went to Chicago and did Second City and all that kind of comedy stuff. And then I went to LA where I worked on some short films with a production company that Mom and I actually co-founded, which is one of the reasons you can find her on IMDb if you go look there. And then I was in LA and COVID happened. And so all of LA shut down, everything I was doing. This poor woman I knew, she was working on her thesis film to graduate from one of the film programs up there. And the last thing I did before COVID shut everything down was we were getting the set ready and, putting up wallpaper in the house she was going to use. And then she never got to do that film. Everything shut down.
Oh, that's so sad.
It was really sad. So then I was I always say, sitting in a glass box waiting to die in LA, $1,500 a month with nowhere to go and nothing to do. And ultimately I decided to move back to Virginia, back to Richmond, which was not my first choice. And I always had sort of planned for it to be a pit stop. But then the longer I've spent here, the less I wanted to leave. And I actually bought a house here last May. So now I am Richmond based. And I am in the family business. I'm working for the press at the moment. I am managing our audiobook stuff. And I've been getting very into audio engineering and production. And that's everything. That is my entire life summed up succinctly in 5 minutes.
Well, and you're getting ready to launch your own audio production company, which is called, tell them.
It's called Happy Possum.
There's no such thing, by the way, as a happy possum. I don't know where he got this weird idea after being raised on a farm, but
well, it's all of the companies I'm involved with tend to be adjective animal. The production company is rude horse. So
that's
it's just,
true. That's true. Now that you mention it.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm starting my own audio production company and I'm writing and all kinds of fun stuff like that.
Very
cool. Yeah. Thanks for sharing. That's really neat. And we'll dive deeper. There's always more. You think you get someone's life story, but there's always more. So we'll dive deeper into first your homeschool experience, but I do also want to get to more of how homeschooling set you up for all of the incredible adventures you've been on since graduating. And I want to do a quick ditto to the gap year. I loved having a gap year as well. And it sounds like you had an amazing experience. So coming back to...
Can I say also from the mom side of things, it was so good for me to basically give him a passport and say goodbye. I mean, I think I cried for the whole afternoon, but it was just because I didn't know what was going to happen. But what happened was that he went out and figured things out. It was amazing.
There was a moment in China where I got lost several hours from where I was supposed to be. My phone died and I had to... not speaking Chinese, I had to figure out how to get back to where I was going on the bus system, and I did it.
You're here.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, for a homeschooler who really had not been away from home for protracted amounts of time, it was then when I got back, going to college 2 hours away seemed like much less of a big deal than it would have if I had immediately gone. And I'll also say, I was going to say about that experience too, I think I value it so much now. I have dreams pretty frequently where I'm about to go and get to do all of it again. And I get so excited. And then I wake up, I'm like, oh well.
I'm a grown up now.
Yeah.
I do remember towards the end of that trip, I remember you calling me because you were in Australia and you were stranded at the airport and your flight had been delayed or something. I don't know if you remember this. And they were going to close the airport. And so you didn't have anywhere to go. And you were like, yeah, I'm just going to go around the corner. There's a McDonald's. I'll hang out there. And then I'll go back to the airport. And I thought, okay, this kid is fine. He can handle these things.
There was a McDonald's half a mile away. So I just dragged my suitcase down there and just sat there and had coffee all night. They really hated me. And then I went back to the airport the next day and I got back. Yeah.
And there you were.
Awesome. All right. So I teased to our listeners that I was going to ask you to summarize your homeschool experience in 3 words.
Mm-hmm. So the 3 words that this was one of the harder questions to answer, actually, but the 3 words that came to me were, it seems like the first 2 are contradictions of each other, but I think we can get into why they're not. The first 2 were consistent and flexible. And then the third one was varied. And I think as to why consistent and flexible sort of go hand in hand, I think that comes up later for you, not to show how the sausage is made, but Susanna, you sent me some questions beforehand to sort of think about. And I think sort of naturally get into that a little bit more with some of the answers to these other questions.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, awesome. So we'll start at the closer to the beginning with some of your earliest memories or happiest memories of homeschooling as a little kid. Where do those memories start for you?
So, well, and immediately getting back into what I just said, which is one of the things that I really remember that was the flexibility was we were able to, on beautiful fall and spring days, Mom would say, you know what, no school today, just go outside and just run until you pass out. Like, just go play outside, take the day. And then in the middle of August, when it was absolutely disgusting and nobody wanted to go outside, we would do school on those days in the air conditioning. And so we ended up doing the same amount of school as you would if you had regular semesters and then got the summer off, except we had the flexibility to take advantage of being, in Virginia in the spring and fall. So that's one thing I remember is sort of the joy of waking up on a beautiful morning and being told you can go play outside today, have fun.
That makes me happy that you remember that.
Absolutely. And I think also, I mean, not to say all of my happiest memories involve not doing school, but it was the sort of interstitials between subjects when it was like, you burn your brain out on Latin, and then it's like, all right, here's some chocolate chip cookie dough, a favorite at our house, and you can go do whatever for 10 or 15 minutes. And to be able to do that and kind of also be in our house, where my room was and where all my stuff was, and to get breaks between subjects where I was sort of in that very comfortable environment was really, really nice. And I think really helped me reset my brain and get ready for the next thing in a way that maybe I wouldn't have been able to if I had been in a more stressful environment. Because I think it's fair to say I was a sensitive child.
You had your sensitivities. But you know what, Christopher, I think that's a really interesting point. I think anyone who has worked a 9-to-5 office job knows how stressful it is to be away from all your stuff. Like, even if you have a lunch break and you can go out and sit on a bench or something, you can't relax. I mean, I mostly work at home now, and I've got, 3 or 4 hours of really hard work. And then you know what I do? I put on my pajamas and go sit in my office for a bit. And that sort of recovery period is something that you can only do when you're in your safe space in your home, and not necessarily if you're in an institutional setting. I hadn't thought of it that way before, but that's really interesting. That also kind of reproduces in a way the college experience, though, right? You go to a couple of classes and then you go back to your room. Absolutely, yeah. And also, I mean, I know I said around all my things, but it's not so much about like I'm close to all my toys, but it's exactly what you just said. It's the presence of everything around you is familiar. That is yeah. That is a really interesting way of thinking about it. I did feed you guys a lot of sugar. You did, and you know what? A lot of cookies. Yeah, but it worked. It worked. It really did. It did. I still have a fondness for chocolate chip cookie dough, which is less helpful now that I'm 33. But yes, we all experience that. And I would actually like to add, just to sort of give a more rounded experience of this whole thing, that I would say I was the umbrella organization. I was the mastermind of who was doing what when, but I didn't do all the homeschooling. My husband did it. My mom worked with all of the kids when they were younger, lots of time doing reading and spelling with them. So it wasn't just me. I was the person who was saying, go do this now, but I wasn't always the person doing it.
That makes sense. And I think that's helpful for folks to hear, because I think I know I have this kind of stereotypical homeschool situation where it's like, dad's off at work, mom's homeschooling the kids. And there's so many different situations and ways that you have to be flexible and creative to make homeschooling work for your family, especially I think now as families have different structures and mom's working too. And so that is a really helpful point. But
well,
Chris,
and can I just ask something else and get Christopher's intake on this? I remember homeschooling with you in particular being pretty intensive up through 6th or 7th grade. But after that, I feel like it was a lot of matter of me saying, go do this and then come back. I don't remember doing a lot of intensive one-on-one with you. And you had tutors, right? You had Audrey doing Japanese. You had various people doing various things with you. And so I was sort of like, well, did you do this? But I don't remember doing a whole lot of intensive one-on-one teaching with you.
No, yeah, I remember that being the case as well. And I think it was a matter of, when you are homeschooled for a while, then you kind of figure out how it works. Yeah. And because the sort of methods of doing it, I think, stay consistent even as you get older. I can't really speak to a public school experience, but I'm guessing as you sort of get into higher grades and stuff like that, maybe the way that things work changes up so that, you would have to adapt a little bit more. But so one of my words at the beginning was consistent, and sort of the way, even as we got older and as we took on more challenging material and challenging subjects, the way that we did it and processed information and all this different stuff stayed the same, so that when I got older, I was able to have a little bit more agency, and you could step away and help the younger ones who still needed that guidance, and I could kind of just go do my own thing. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, Susanna, I didn't mean to distract us from your outline, which was very excellent.
No problem. Actually, I think that kind of feeds into the next question about walking through a typical homeschool day with us. And as you mentioned, I'm sure that changed over time, but kind of your impression of what it was like to wake up and what happened after that.
Yeah. So I think we would usually get up around 8, and that would change a little bit because, when we were really young, we'd be up at 7:30 and be like, wee! But then
we really didn't want you up earlier because we were still drinking coffee and meditating.
Yeah. But then, of course, when I got to be 15, 16, then it would be 8:30 and be like, get up. And, the sort of classic teenager thing of needing more sleep. But so we would get up around 8. And the first thing we would do would be the farm chores, because we lived on a farm. So we had dogs we had to go walk. I had chickens from about 13, 14 till I left.
Yep.
So I'd have to go take care of them. I would.
Do you know? I forgot that you were taking care of the chickens. Oh, right.
That was originally my hustle.
That was originally your hustle. Yeah.
And I sold organic, like home raised eggs for $2 a carton, which is
a dream world.
Yeah. Now you go to Whole Foods, it's like $8 for eggs that are not even that good.
So when you say hustle, you mean you ran a business with these eggs?
Absolutely, yeah.
That's super cool.
But
he collected the money.
Yeah,
we paid all the costs. He collected the money, as I recall.
Absolutely, yeah. But I was going to say, I don't recommend this, but I would go out in bare feet on the farm every day, even when it was raining, walking through gravel covered in chicken poop in my bare feet, thinking nothing of it, which is, come to think of it, maybe why I survived biting monkey tails in South Africa.
That's a good point.
My immune system was like, whatever, bring it on. And so we would come back in, we would have breakfast. We would all be allowed to read at the table, which was lovely. And then the way that we did things was we had school lists, which sometimes, to tell you the truth, I still wish that I had school lists to meter out the activities I need to do during the day. Now it's just become like sticky notes on my laptop, which are less helpful. But basically, on each day, we would have a list of subjects that we needed to do. And one nice thing was that they would vary in intensity from day to day, depending on, I think, Mom, which one of you and Dad, like who had free time to help us out that day, what your schedules were like that day, because I know you were teaching at William and Mary at the time. So on days where you had to go teach classes, then we would have maybe lighter school days, or days where we would go down and spend more time with Grammy. But so we would get started on the school list. And I think my memory is, correct me if I'm wrong, that we would tend to tackle the more challenging stuff in the morning, kind of while everybody's brains were fresh, right?
We always did that first because this is just human nature. We just all got more and more tired and hungrier as the day went on, no matter how many cookies I fed you. So whatever was the most urgent was the thing we did first. And that tended to vary from time to time. But I think maybe Dan was the most mathematically inclined of the four of you. But for you other three, I think math tended to be a little bit more of the challenge. And so we would hit that first.
Yeah. Math and Latin.
Whoa.
Yeah.
I tried. Listen, all you out there in classical homeschooling world, I tried. We tried Latin. It didn't go.
Well, let me tell you this. I did not like Latin, but I am very bad at learning languages. That is not a strength of mine. My brain does not work in a way where I have an easy time figuring that out. And again, not due to lack of effort or anything like that, but just for whatever reason, it doesn't stick in my brain. I'm really good at English, but I'm not great at other languages. However,
I feel that, Chris.
Yeah.
I feel like you're describing me right now because it's not for lack of effort.
Well, and so when I went to UVA, I had to fulfill some language credits and to graduate.
I remember this.
And I was very lucky because UVA actually offered a program where I could go and fulfill all of those requirements during one intensive set of classes in the summer, which was wonderful because I didn't have to try and balance it with other work, like sort of because, you really have to concentrate on languages. And I did Italian, and I don't know that I would have made it through if I had not had in my brain enough Latin to be able to not fake my way through, but to be able to look at words sometimes and be like, okay, I don't remember what we're doing here, but that's definitely a Latin root that I remember that I relentlessly drilled. So, I was able to do a little bit. And even when, reading in English, when I was younger, reading, words that I didn't understand, knowing the Latin roots did help me figure out what words meant through context. So I didn't like it, but I can't deny that it did do something useful for me.
I have to say, though, that looking back, the amount of energy and sometimes even tears that were shed over it, I feel like I wish I'd let it go sooner. And we had done something else instead. I mean, if I could do it again, I would have taken that time and found you somebody to chat Spanish with you 3 times a week, right? Which would have given you a lot of the same benefits and some even better, like, real world advantages. But, that's hindsight.
Yeah. I didn't. Yeah, there were some tears at times, but I think that's just going to happen no matter what, because everybody's going to have. I mean, I also I'm very lucky to get to teach some creative writing at Well Trained Mind Academy, which is really fun. And I have students who are super, obsessed with math and physics. I have one kid in my class right now who every creative writing assignment he does, every story he writes is just full of mathematic equations and like explanations of how scientific theories work. And everyone's brain just works in a different way. Everybody just has an easier time processing some things than others. But I don't know that it was bad to sort of have to take on subjects that I did not have an affinity for, because when you get to college, if you go to college, not everybody has to take that path. But if that's something that you're interested in doing, you are going to probably have to fulfill some general requirements. So it certainly was good to have had experience having to do things that I did not necessarily naturally flourish at.
Would you say that Latin was the biggest challenge for your homeschool, or were there other things?
For me, Latin and math, not my strongest subjects. I also had a hard time with the logic program that I took. But again, to the theme of things that I did not enjoy at the time, ultimately providing some benefit, it did provide me with a measure of critical thinking, which I think has been very helpful to me. Especially now in times where, you get all kinds of information thrown at you from every direction. Right. And it really benefits you to pause and ask yourself when you see anything, okay, let's apply some critical thinking here. Let's look for where this is coming from, that kind of thing.
Hey, Susanna, can I interject a question here?
Of course.
Because, Christopher, I'm really enjoying listening to you talk about this, but to be honest, how should I put this? I was expecting you to be a little bit more negative than you're being. And I think that's partly because as an adult looking back, I'm like, oh my gosh, there were so many things I wish I had done differently. So could I invite you to be a little bit more negative?
Sure.
And not necessarily about, you don't have to be negative about me in particular, that's fine. But were there things, I know that when I went to college, because I was a homeschooled student, when I went to college in particular, there were things that I was like, what the flag nod is happening right now? Nobody told me how to deal with this. I wasn't prepared. Were there things like that looking back, you wish you had been better prepped for? But let me not put words in your mouth.
No,
Please
sure.
feel free to be a little more negative.
Well, no, to tell you the truth, I am not afraid to be negative. And I think some of that stuff comes up a little bit later in some of Susanna's other questions. But, I have been reflecting on these questions. And at the end of the day, I do have a lot more positive than negative to say. It's not that I'm shying away from the negative elements of it. But, in retrospect, I am very pleased about the place in life that all of that stuff brought me to. And so, and also, I laugh at myself at 11 years old crying about Latin because without needing to get into it, I have had much worse things than having to sit and do Latin for an hour happen in my life since then. And so, a lot of the stuff that seemed sort of world ending at the time, I think also, Mom, that you should remember, and maybe this is helpful for people out there, you obviously had a fully formed adult brain at this point, and you have all these extremely clear memories of how you did things and things that worked and things that didn't work and the things that you feel guilty for. And I know you sort of have been thinking about parents and children and their relationships, especially with Grammy and Papa both passing last year. Yeah. But, I think when we're kids, our brains certainly are more open to absorbing things, both positive and negative. But I am not a psychologist or anything like that. But for me, at least, I feel like more positive stuff than negative sort of naturally gets retained, at least consciously. So I think that probably your tendency is to be harder on yourself for things that maybe, you lie awake thinking about. You're like, I should have done this. I screwed up this, that, and the other, for things that just completely skimmed off the top of my tiny brain. And I never thought about again.
I hope that's reassuring to all the parents out there. And look, I will say this. Those of you who've listened to this podcast for a while will know that I have made various references to a child who would have done better in a classroom setting. That child is not Christopher. No. Christopher, I never thought that you would have been better in a classroom setting. I thought it would have stifled you and that you were always better running your own day and having more control over your own schedule.
Sure. And again, I have some more thoughts about that with some of the later questions, but just to circle back to the rest of how our day went.
Oh, yeah, sorry. My bad.
No. So we would tackle the tricky stuff in the morning. We would have lunch, and then we would have 1 to 3 nap time. And let me just say again,
we loved nap time.
As a 33-year-old, I'm like, man, do I wish that was still a thing. But we didn't have to sleep. We just went in our room and quietly entertained ourselves for 2 hours, which I think was a break that you were giving yourself.
It was.
But also, that was when I was able to develop a lot of my creativity, because I would I would make up stories with my toys. I would listen to audiobooks. I would read. I would do whatever. And that was really valuable. Now, I'm sure that would not be the case for all. I'm sure there are kids that if you put them in a room for 2 hours and told them entertain yourself, they would lose their minds. But for me, that was very helpful. And then after that, we would work on our other subjects from around 3 to 5:30. Yep. Right after nap time would be, we would
more cookies.
Sure. Yep. Absolutely. We would tackle maybe anything hard left over. And then we would kind of end the day on I remember almost having the feeling of like, okay, I'm going to save the good stuff for the end. Like reading, just take this book, go sit down, read a chapter or two of it. That would be great. And another thing, going back to the flexibility of it that I liked is that, so this consistent but flexible, this was our consistent schedule every day. And so it was nice to know, all right, I just got to get through the Latin, and then we're going to have lunch, and then I'm going to get 2 hours to regroup, and then I'll get to do reading this afternoon, knowing that was coming, but at the same time being flexible enough to, for example, if I was really into a book I was reading, you might say, all right, you know what, you can skip something you dislike today, just keep reading, keep enjoying that book. And that sort of helped me follow my natural inclination towards, being really interested in reading and literature and things. And then also flexibility just in, some days we would, instead of doing school in the afternoon, we'd go to the library in Williamsburg. Sometimes instead of doing school in the morning, Grammy would need help in her garden. So we would go out and spend 2 hours, chasing birds out of the strawberries. And so it was a consistent schedule, which was comforting, but also enough variation within it to keep it from feeling like a slog.
The nap time also, just again, from the parent point of view, that was our shift change, right? So generally...
That's true.
Yes. Yeah. Right. If you think back on it now.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was when we met up and I was like, hi, Pete. Pete was like, hi, Sue. And I said, here's what we did. Here's what didn't work. I didn't get any of this done. Bye. And he would take over, or vice versa, because we used to alternate mornings and afternoons.
Yes. And I will say, not to throw Dad under the bus, but I'm sure you enjoyed the afternoons where he made us chocolate chip pancakes for lunch. And then we came out of nap time like, woohoo! Let's go!
I will say there were a number of afternoons when I came back and I was like, what did you do? And Pete was like, well, everybody wanted to watch El Dorado again. But you know what? You guys all survived somehow.
We did.
All right. So what were the biggest challenges for you, Chris, during your homeschool years?
So I think one of the big things, and something that I know, Mom, you and I have talked about a lot, is just, I think this is equally due to the fact that we live on a farm in the middle of nowhere as it is to homeschooling, but there weren't really a lot of kids my age around. No. We would occasionally try to go to a co-op, but I'm sure that I don't have to say to anybody who's been in a co-op before that there can often be socially challenging dynamics in them.
Wheels within wheels.
and that I would say did... I mean, at times it put me at a disadvantage going into college because I think that I had to learn a lot of social lessons in college that I might have learned earlier, which I'm sure would have happened to a certain extent anyway. But I did feel it was an interesting mix, though, because I did know the church, Dad's church that we were going to at the time, a lot of college students came and I would hang out with college students and talk to them. So I sort of had many of my sensibilities formed by talking to people who were 7 or 8 years older than me, for better and worse, which lent itself to, whenever I tell people that I meet, my friends, whenever I tell them I'm homeschooled, 50-50, I either get, I never would have guessed, or, oh, it all makes sense now.
Okay, so, that makes me so happy, Christopher, to be honest. Yeah.
I would say the other thing that was challenging for me was that I do have a touch of ADD or ADHD. I can't remember. I wasn't paying attention, but I think that kind of thing was maybe less. I don't know if it was less prevalently discussed in the 2000s.
I think that is somewhat due to the fact that you were homeschooled, that we never had that diagnosed. But actually, no, it just wasn't nearly as much of a thing,
right,
as it is now. So I think that's also sort of a chronology issue.
Totally. Well, and I would say, we were talking about this sort of self-motivated tasks. I think that at times I could have trouble with that, especially with the stuff that I wasn't interested in. Yeah. And that's kind of why the school lists were helpful, and still having a little bit, even if I was sort of, doing my own work, having some element of some exterior force holding me responsible was still really helpful, but that was at times challenging, although I did enjoy having that agency over the stuff that I was working on. And I think generally I kept up to pace. At times that was challenging to not maybe have, as I got older, to maybe not have as much structure to kind of keep me on the straight and narrow, if that makes sense. I hope that answer didn't wander around too much.
No, that makes sense. I definitely know what you mean about, you kind of get that gradual release of responsibility. And sometimes there's some negotiating of how much responsibility you can handle as a high schooler or a middle schooler, and be tricky to navigate.
Yeah. I think those are really the main things that spring to mind, though, were sort of the social element and the sometimes having a hard time motivating myself element. I mean, I do think I promise I'm not being paid to be on this podcast and say all these things, but I do think that homeschooling...
He's really not.
I'm really not. Homeschooling really did help me. And it's interesting, this kind of, not to jump ahead, Susanna, but it kind of ties into a question you have later about how homeschooling shaped and approached current career path in life. If I can go there.
Let's go there.
The thing is that the way that it has affected my life, both positively and negatively, is that I have such a drive to pursue things that I'm passionate about. And I have such a hard time making myself care about or put effort into anything that I am not invested in some way. So creativity, my theater degree, my writing, this audio work I'm doing, I'm fully in it because I love doing it. But then, when there are other elements of the things that we all have to do at various jobs or in life, I sometimes have an incredibly hard time getting myself to do them. And I think, I'm not going to say that was solely because I was encouraged to pursue passions, but I think it did kind of help me form my brain in a way of, it's okay to go after the things that interest you, even if it means some other stuff falls by the wayside. And obviously that does occasionally have negative benefits, like not really learning to, consistently be on top of paying all of my bills until I was in my early 30s, because I would get envelopes and just be like, this isn't sparking passion, and throw it in a drawer. But on the other hand, not to try and get too deep or anything, but what is the point of life if not to pursue the things that you care about? So that was sort of the positive and the negative that sort of arose from all of that.
This is a really interesting point, Christopher. And I guess I do wonder, and maybe some of our listeners will send us messages and give us give us their thoughts on this. But I wonder how much of this is personality, how much of it is being homeschooled, and how much of it is the interaction between the two. Because I do think people who homeschool are more likely to be, as both of your grandparents were, by the way, oh, never mind, we'll just do this our own way and never mind the rest. Look, I run 3 businesses. I have lists of things. Call the workers' compensation office and straighten this up. Do this, do this, do that, do this. And I have this list, which I will hold on to for weeks until somebody finally says to me, will you please call the workers' compensation office and straighten this out? And when I get up in the morning, I think to myself, I've got this amazing manuscript that I'm working on, and I'm going to do that manuscript, and I'll just put this off until, and so, but again, I don't know how much of that is personality, how much of it is homeschooling, how much of it is the interaction between the two. But it's still something I struggle with also.
I think it's an interaction between the two. And I think that is why that's why homeschooling can be a really positive choice, is that it does feel like you sort of tailored it to help me sort of use the education to discover the truest version of myself, but also the truest version of myself often procrastinates a lot. and arguably, maybe if I had been in a more structured environment, I would have learned to deal with that more, but maybe not, because I do think there is a lot of my personality just kind of lends itself to the exact same thing. Oh, look at this checklist, but what would be more fun right now?
I've got this great novel that needs the next chapter. Yes,
exactly.
No, but just the fact that at any given point, you can wake up in the day and say, there's this project I'm really excited about. Like, that's no small thing. And I think, because I feel the same way about my homeschool experience, that didn't ever get stifled. And that's huge.
Absolutely. And again, to be clear, it's not like procrastinating. It's not procrastinating everything I have to be doing just so I can have fun. It's putting things off that I don't care about because I am invested in creating things that I do care about, and I want those to succeed, and I want to sort of, continue to build a career and a professional life with those things. And I am very lucky in that I've had the opportunities to do that. I think that's worth saying too, is that it's all well and good to have this outlook when you are as privileged as I am to have have been able to go on an amazing gap year and to go to UVA and to do all this stuff. It's easy to sort of talk about, you know, what is life if not pursuing your passions from a place where you have been enabled to do that through circumstance. And so I certainly don't take that for granted at all.
There has been actually some really good writing done on the why doing what you love should be your career is a crock, which Susanna, maybe I can send you a few links and you could link those in the show notes because there is no such thing as a career in which you're only doing what you love, but there's always crap. but I do agree with you, Christopher, that the like settling down to the crap is perhaps less easy when most of your education has been pursue your passion. So
Right. All right. So my next question is about growing up with the Well-Trained Mind Press was kind of coming up at the same time. Susan, you were working on building curriculum and also homeschooling at the same time. So Chris, what was that experience like for you? Did you end up being kind of a beta tester for different things? Did you get to use things before they were out? And were there things that you loved, things that you hated?
So I will say we were beta testers for some Story of the World activities, which was that was very fun.
We did the ice cream boats.
We did build perhaps an ice cream boat every 2 weeks.
Yes, you guys wanted to do that. I had to think of ways to make that Greek and Egyptian and Phoenician and Roman. They all had ice cream boats.
So I think when I was that age, that was when you were working on Story of the World. And I wouldn't say it was even beta testing so much as just you reading it to us as you were, you know, doing it and coming up with activities. And I think having all of us to entertain helped you shape some of those activities. But what I wonder, and maybe you can speak to this, is I feel like it was less beta testing and it was more as you were working on the book, The Well-Trained Mind, and as you were thinking about developing all these other grammar and writing curriculums, it was you looking at the stuff we were doing and seeing what did and didn't work for us and sort of coalescing those impressions and lessons learned into creating your own curriculum. So I don't know that it was like consciously like, now we will beta test this product on you, but it was the organic process of, you know what, here's maybe a way that would be helpful for people to do this.
No, and I think that's true. And it wasn't just that I had 4 children under the age of 10. It was that the 3 of them were boys. And I remember saying in exasperation, every single curricula out there is written for girls. And I know I'm being super reductionist right now, but in terms of the actual development of hand, like muscle coordination, of attention span, and of the sorts of material that grab the child's imagination, I found that boys and girls were super different. And a lot of what we did at the Well-Trained Mind Press came out of me saying, yeah, my kid is not going to do that. Not kids 9, 7, and 4. They're not going to do that. So what can we do instead? So it was more the experience of living with you guys, real children in my house.
One thing that I have always loved and that people should go look up if they haven't read it is the pieces that you wrote about your experience of a day in the life of working with all of us. I will never forget my brother Daniel, who is by the way an incredible musician, an incredible violinist, so smart, just a really amazing person. But I will never forget the thing that you write about where you just had to go lock yourself in the bathroom just to take a beat before you exploded, and Daniel pushed his hands under the crack of the door and went, "Daniel fingers."
Daniel fingers.
If anyone hasn't read that, you have to go read that. But
we'll link in the show notes. That was real.
Aside from the gender stuff too, I think it was the fact that I don't think anyone would mind me saying that all 4 of us, and probably you too, I think our whole family is a little bit neurodivergent, at least, you know?
Yeah.
I think so. I think a lot of the curriculums are sort of almost, to my memory, in my experience, having them used on me, designed for almost a classroom setting where you're expected to sit for a certain amount of time and pay attention. Whereas, all of our brains were just firing off in all these crazy directions.
Oh my goodness, your brains went all over the place. Susanna, that's actually Christopher, thank you for that. That is a really good way to rephrase the question. It's not so much that he or the other children were beta testers for press curricula. They were kind of beta testers for every other curricula, which made me say, this is not working.
It doesn't work.
This is not going to work. And here is why it's not working. So a lot of what the press did came out of that and me saying, all right, let's do this in a more humane, more reasonable, more age appropriate. I don't know how many times I say age appropriate, when it comes to curricula. So a lot of what we did grew out of frustration with the curricula that were available that we used. And I was like, no, this isn't going to do it. Let's do this instead.
And I think that's an important note because it's tested against real life experience with 4 children of different ages, all in the room at the same time. And that's where it impacted how the Welch Mind Press curricula was written, not in a formal way, but of course you're doing this at the same time. Of course it's feeding each other, both of these massive projects they're taking on.
Well, and one of my challenges has been, sorry, Christopher, I'm going to hand the floor back over to you in a minute, but as we revise the activities and the Story of the World activity books, I am constantly saying, guys, I think it's really easy to get away from our original at least one activity in every chapter has got to be super easy and super hands-on for the person with the 5-year-old that's bouncing off the walls. Because everything that I tried to use was super academic and it had lots of moving parts and it had lots of fine motor stuff. You guys can't see me because we don't have a video, but I'm doing things with my hands that my kids could not do. And they turned out fine. Christopher, you turned out fine. But listen, at 5 or 6, if I had given you 7 colored pencils and told you to fill in pieces of a mosaic, no, that just wasn't going to happen. So, yeah.
Sounds lovely now at 33. Although, and perhaps in this conversation, perhaps in this conversation too, we ought to, we would perhaps be remiss given the past 54 minutes, not to mention that it's possible the sugar consumption had something to do with it too. But that really was necessary in just emotionally helping us get through it. Anyway.
I do not regret the sugar consumption. It was a necessary thing.
It was.
All right, Chris. So as we are closing this discussion, I have one more question, which is if you could go back and change one thing about how you were homeschooled, what would it be?
Less siblings. No, no, I'm kidding. I love them all.
I actually have a workshop where I'm like, what can you do to simplify your homeschool? And I'm like, get rid of one child.
No,
kidding.
Well, not to cop out of the question, but that's always if you could go back and change is a question that I always have trouble with because I have trouble connecting with that question because I am happy with where I am and where I have ended up. And I do think that all of the decisions brought me to this point. Now, was the experience perfect always? No. Were there things we did that in retrospect, probably could have done without? No. I'm sure you won't mind me saying, did you occasionally get frustrated and yell at all of us? 100%. But at the end of the day, all of it brought me to a place where I am pursuing things professionally that I'm excited about. I have a balanced social life. I am in a good place. So it's hard to think about, what would I go back and change? Because, it's the butterfly effect. Anything you change could have taken you in an entirely different direction. And I'm happy with the direction I'm going in.
So then a better final question. I said that was the final question, but the better one would be, what is that? Tell us a little bit more about the projects that you are passionate about right now. I think our listeners would love to hear.
Sure. So I love writing. I always have. That was one of the things where it was like, okay, you can skip X today if you go and write. I am teaching writing and I won a playwriting award when I graduated UVA I wrote a version of Macbeth set in a DMV that was just called Beth, and I won an award.
So good.
And so I'm teaching playwriting and creative writing to high schoolers right now, which I absolutely adore. I am writing myself YA fiction, which I'd love to try and publish a book at some point. I do audiobooks for the press. I've been working on doing the Wizard of Oz series, which has been just such a delight. yeah, just writing and creating and chasing the things I'm interested in, and having to eat some of my broccoli too. Audio engineering is not always the most exciting thing in the world, but yeah, that's writing and creating stuff and bringing other people's writing to life. There you go.
Okay, I have a final question, which we can completely cut out if we want to. So maybe a better question than, what would you change would be this. And this is a definite hypothetical, so you don't have to answer it. But thinking ahead to your own children, imagine you've got this little kid there and it's yours. What is one thing that you would definitely do and one thing that you would definitely not do?
So that's an interesting question. I mean, I think even though I said there were negative elements of sort of being relentlessly encouraged to pursue the things I'm passionate about, I would 100% do that with my own kid, because, I think that is the point of life, is to do the things that you're excited about doing, and, not to be a successful cog in the wheel of capitalism.
So well, we all are.
I would definitely do that. I always think there's probably a lot of people have seen it. I think it's probably popular with homeschoolers, but there's a cartoon, and I can't remember who it's by, but I think it's about standardized testing, where it's a guy standing in front of a tree, and there's a monkey, a giraffe, a fish, a frog, and a snake, and he's like, "Next test, climb this tree." So I think I would sort of evaluate with any future hypothetical children, I loved my homeschooling experience. Is it the right thing for you?
Yep.
If it was, then I would love to do that. If not, if I thought that maybe they would, for whatever reason, do better in school, then I would send them there. It's really a case-by-case basis. And I think you said earlier, Mom, that one of my siblings might have benefited more from another one went to Montessori for a little bit.
Yes. And that was a good experience.
Absolutely. And so I really do think it was the right thing. It's not the right thing for everyone. It was the right thing for me. And the thing that I would definitely do would be gauge what would be the best fit for my future hypothetical child, who I'm trying to think of a name for, but nothing is coming to me.
Ezra.
Ugh.
We apologize now to all of our listeners named Ezra.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Ezra's, we love you. This one goes out to all the Jedediahs. In terms of what I wouldn't do, I don't know. I promise I'm not trying to sugarcoat things. I have a hard time thinking. I have a hard time thinking in negatives. I have a hard time thinking in what wouldn't I do? What's the thing to avoid? What's the bad thing? I'm always thinking in terms of what's exciting. What is not the direction to go, but what is the direction to go? You know what I mean? And I'm not trying to dodge the question or anything, but that's just kind of what I find myself thinking in answer to that question.
Well, I appreciate that, because I have the same reactions, because I am often asked this about my past. And I'm like, well, I guess I wouldn't get involved in a fundamentalist patriarchal cult that said that women shouldn't have a voice. So there's that. But then I look back on it and I'm like, but I understand why that happened. I don't, it wasn't a good experience, but I understand why it happened, and I bear no ill will towards it. So it's not like I could be like.
And to my earlier point about the what do you wish had been different question, if you had not had that experience, you would not be as well informed in how to advise other people how to avoid it or deal with it in a constructive way if they find themselves facing it, So it wasn't wasted experience. It was just unpleasant for you.
Well, and I'm pretty sure that if I hadn't had that experience, Christopher, I would not have said, yes, get on a plane and go to Africa and India and China.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, that to me, that was my response to being so hyper overprotected. So, sometimes benefits take more than a generation to be made known.
Yeah. Ezra's going to do great.
And Jedediah.
Well, thank you, Chris, so much for joining us and for sharing your experiences. I think our listeners are going to really appreciate getting that insight from you. And I know I really enjoyed this conversation.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me.
Christopher, it's so fun to be on an adult to adult
It is, isn't
level
it? Yeah.
with you. And let me just put out there to all you moms with lots and lots and lots of kids running around your ankles, this will happen, and it's amazing.
Yeah, agreed.
Thank you for listening to the Well-Trained Mind podcast. You can find Susan at facebook.com/susan.wise.bauer and Susanna on Instagram at hopintohomeschool. Our engineering and mixing is done by AJ Falari at ajfalari.online. This podcast is produced by Well-Trained Mind Press, and our supervising producer is Chris Bauer. If you enjoyed the show, help us out by rating and reviewing us wherever you listen to podcasts. If you have questions, responses, or ideas for future episodes, email us at podcast@welltrainedmind.com. We'll be back next week, so stay tuned.